Ellen White Reconsidered, a series of presentations for people with questions about Ellen White and her writings. The topic today is Arthur White on Ellen White's transparent use of sources in the Great Controversy. Welcome. So, how much of the Great Controversy is visions and how much is condensed history? Today, I'm going to share a little piece of an article that I found back in 1979 in the Review and Herald that Arthur White very candidly described Ellen White's use of sources.
Historical Sources and the Conflict Series. Preserved portions of Ellen White's original drafts of The Great Controversy demonstrate her use of historical works in the Conflict Series. By Arthur L. White. Some may feel that in her work of tracing the history of the controversy in past ages, Ellen White should have ignored all historical records and put down only what she could reconstruct from what she had seen in vision. Such a viewpoint implies a mechanical, dictational concept of inspiration, according to which the very words Ellen White should use would have been imparted to her. However, neither she nor her associates held such a view, nor does the Seventh-day Adventist Church. At its 1883 General Conference session, the denomination recorded the following declaration: "We believe the light given by God to his servants is by the enlightenment of the mind, thus imparting the thoughts and not, except in rare cases, the very words in which the ideas should be expressed." Review and Herald, November 27, 1883, quoted in Messenger to the Remnant, page 65. There is strong evidence, internal as well as external, that the scenes of the controversy story, as they had passed before Ellen White in vision, provided the basic framework of the narrative, and probably many of the details as well. However, evidence is lacking that all the details, or even all phases of the history, were thus revealed to her, especially in matters of lesser importance or of purely secular significance. Thus, as she traced a connected history, she made use of the records of the past. And since, as she stated, "I am just as dependent upon the Spirit of the Lord in relating or writing a vision, as in having the vision," Spiritual Gifts, Volume 2, page 293. It seems logical to assume that the filling in of some of the narrative details from accepted sources was in full harmony with the biddings of the Holy Spirit to trace the history of the Great Controversy. Indeed, in her introduction to the Great Controversy, she pointed out that the great events which have marked the progress of reform in past ages are matters of history, well known and universally acknowledged by the Protestant world. They are facts which none can gainsay. The Great Controversy, page 11. Then she explains, "This history I have presented briefly, in accordance with the scope of the book, and the brevity which must necessarily be observed, the facts having been condensed into as little space as seemed consistent with a proper understanding of their application." Same book, pages 11 and 12. She went a step further in her explanations by noting, where a historian has so grouped together events as to afford, in brief, a comprehensive view of the subject, or has summarized details in a convenient manner, his words have been quoted, because his statement affords a ready and forcible presentation of the subject. Same book, page 12. W. C. White recalls that, as Ellen White was writing on the history of the Reformation, she came home one day from the Review and Herald Library, where she often worked, and told her husband of being especially impressed by the Spirit of God to look into a certain volume, where her eyes readily fell on a passage that was particularly helpful to her. W. C. White to L. E. Froome, December 13, 1934. In the main, the working papers involved in the preparation of the Ellen G. White Conflict of the Ages books have not been preserved. Through the years, Mrs. White traveled widely and from time to time moved her place of residence from one point to another in the United States and to Europe and Australia, and then back to America. It was apparently assumed that after the manuscript for a volume had received her final approval and the printed book had been accepted by her, there was no purpose in keeping the masses of papers that could render no further service. However, we do have a small portion of her original handwritten draft on the experience of Martin Luther, and this enables us to trace the steps in preparation of one of the chapters of the Great Controversy. It is a manuscript of 51 pages, written on a tablet of paper approximately 5 1/2 by 8 1/2 inches. One side of each sheet is filled with handwriting, and the other side bears a portion of a hat catalog printed by the Pacific Press.
Ron Grable was kind enough to share with me his analysis of the Luther manuscript, which included several pages from the manuscript, which I will show you.
This handwritten manuscript begins just as Luther is leaving the Diet of Worms and proceeds with an account of his kidnapping and seclusion at the castle of Wartburg. The latter part of the manuscript is devoted to an extended discussion of his efforts to save the Reformation from the excesses of various enthusiasts, with comparisons made to the experiences through which early Adventists passed in their encounters with fanatics.
So here you see a photocopy of the first page in the Luther manuscript, and a transcription over here that Ron Grable has supplied. Sometimes there's a period, but a lot of the time she doesn't include punctuation. And her capitalization will be supplied later as well. But this is her way of condensing the history, what part she wanted included in the chapters on Luther. So this is the first page right here. The next page you can see displayed here in the article, and they've done a nicer job of cleaning it up a little bit, but you might find some difficulty in transcribing it. Once you get used to it, most of this is a lot easier to do.
The early pages of this manuscript were published in the Signs of the Times, October 11, 1883, in an article titled Luther in the Wartburg. The relationship between the handwritten draft and this article is very close. In somewhat condensed form, the material appeared in the 1884 Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 4, as a part of the chapter Luther Before the Diet, and was carried through to the chapter by the same title in the 1888 enlargement. It is obvious that as Mrs. White undertook to pen the chapters on Luther's experiences, she consulted books at hand and chose to follow the outline of the historian, sometimes employing his words to describe historical events. At the same time, she interspersed these quotations and paraphrases with insights on the significance of certain events and with spiritual lessons. In recounting the historical narrative, it appears that she often followed rather closely the Reformation history of D'Aubigné, the author she and her husband had read a decade or two before. She was pleased when she found a condensation of this work in Charles Adams' book Words That Shook the World, published in New York in 1858. Of this, she secured a copy for her personal library. It is a volume of 240 pages said to be pictures of the great reformer sketched mainly from his own sayings, presented in a style and brevity suited to youthful readers. Adams states that his principal source was D'Aubigné.
Even if I didn't have Ellen White's introduction in the 1888 Great Controversy, which was duplicated with some minor changes in the 1911 edition, it's these chapters that would have shown me that Ellen White was transparently using sources. I pulled off this volume, the fourth volume of the Spirit of Prophecy, which is what becomes Great Controversy, and I turned to the chapters on Luther. And as we go there to those chapters, you begin to see quotation marks. Here's one. To a friend of the Reformation, Luther wrote, okay, right here, you see the quotation marks? This is a whole long quotation from him. And then over here, some more quotations, all in this paragraph. And on down, more all through here. Luther Before the Diet, again, you're going to see more quotation marks and even quotation marks within quotation marks, or like here, quotation marks with ... in it, which means that some of the wording has been omitted from a quotation. So it should have been pretty obvious, even with this book, but some people didn't get it. Some people missed the obvious, or what should be obvious. And so in her introduction, she spelled it out. She said, I have condensed known history. So for those who are either surprised or who are trying to make a case against her for doing this, it should be very clear to everyone what she has done and how she is putting this together. The article makes it plain, and the evidence is available for anyone. So no one should be making a case out of the Great Controversy. No one. Thanks for joining us.